Jiu-Jitsu, Royce Gracie is the undefeated Ultimate Fighting Champion, a title which has earned him more than $110,000 in prize money. At only 176 pounds, he is again the lightest competitor in the tournament, but that hasn't stopped him so far. A master grappler, expect Royce to take his opponents to the ground, where he can apply his devastating chokes and joint locks.
Hi, I'm Royce Gracie, and I'm back to defend my title as the Ultimate Fighting Champion.
Leading the way, there's the Grandmaster himself, ELYXR Gracie behind him. There's Hillson, the older brother. All these guys are deadly, there's no question about it. The whole clan is there. Royce right there.
Well, it's extremely loose on the way up. I talked about getting their arms and themselves. Here, he represented families on and himself.
That's the Royce move we see, the way he saunters across the mat. This is unique.
It is hard to express just how much the Gracie family dominated the early days of mixed martial arts in the UFC as a whole. The UFC itself wasn't really around until the early 1990s. In Brazil, the family had been doing something called the Gracie Challenge since the 1920s. Representing their family and their version of jiu-jitsu, they would invite other mixed martial artists to fight them. Sometimes they'd fight behind closed doors in a gym or something like that. Other times they'd fight in a public venue, maybe even in a stadium. But the end result was always the same. The Gracies, it didn't really matter which member of the family would fight, whether it was a patriarch like Helio Gracie or a younger member like Royce Gracie. They typically dominated. Now, that's not to say the Gracie family never lost. They did. They did lose a couple times. But the best comparison I can make is to that of the Nurmagomedov clan today. Members of that family have lost. Like we just saw Umar Nurmagomedov lose to Merab Dvalishvili earlier this year. They've largely dominated the sport for the last decade or so. Islam Makhachev is the current UFC lightweight champion. Umar Nurmagomedov, even including the loss to Merab, is still a top bantamweight. Meanwhile, over in Bellator, Usman Nurmagomedov is the current Bellator lightweight champion. Khabib Nurmagomedov is retired, but still 29-0, one of the greatest fighters of all time. In the same way that Khabib Nurmagomedov leads the Nurmagomedov clan today, Royce Gracie led the Gracies in the 90s. See, for UFC 1 in 1993, they could have picked anybody from their family to actually enter the one-night tournament, but instead they went for the relatively younger, lighter Royce Gracie. Royce wasn't the most threatening looking of the Gracies, but that was kind of the whole point. The whole reason the Gracies wanted into this tournament was to promote their fighting system, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. For those unaware, the early days of the UFC didn't really have any, like they had some rules, but they were very few. They didn't have any weight classes, and mixed martial arts wasn't really a thing. They had 8 fighters representing each form of martial arts, and they put him in this 8-man tournament with $50,000 on the line. They all fought in one night. You had Art Jimerson, who was a boxer. You had a Savate expert in the form of Gerard Gordeau. You had shoot fighter Ken Shamrock, so on and so forth. And to show that jiu-jitsu was the best, they picked Royce, who, Frank, looked out of place compared to some of the muscle-up giants in that era, such as the aforementioned Shamrock and Kimo Leopoldo, guys like that. But while he was the lightest member of the UFC 1 tournament, it didn't matter. He knew what to do on the mat, and they didn't have a clue. First round of the UFC 1 tournament, Royce took down and quickly submitted Art Jimerson, who was a boxer who had no idea what to do. In the next round, he scored a submission win over fellow legend, UFC Hall of Famer, Ken Shamrock, before submitting Savate expert Gerard Gordeau in the final round. In under 5 minutes of cage time in the fall of 1993, Royce Gracie cemented himself as the greatest fighter on the planet. That's a position that Royce Gracie would hold for several years. He went on to win the UFC 2, 3, and 4 tournaments. However, after fighting to a time limit draw on a rematch with Ken Shamrock at UFC 5 2 years later, he left the company as a whole. Not only that, he didn't just leave the company, he left MMA. From 1995 to 2000, Royce Gracie didn't compete once. In his place, though, were other family members such as Royce Gracie, Renzo Gracie, and Rickson Gracie. See, while the Gracies were done fighting over in the UFC over in America, they had taken their talents to Pride in Japan. Pride started around the same time as the UFC. While the UFC was trying to run to legislation and trying to get legalized, and at this time, Pride was kind of the opposite. They were going all in on this free show aspect. They were doing some crazy fight bookings, and the first few Pride events honestly were similar to the UFC. They almost looked like advertisements for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. They were just running through these guys.
Hey guys, editing Josh here. I realize I should probably talk more about Pride. My bad.
Yeah, so it is impossible to discuss the history of Pride and MMA in Japan without discussing the history of professional wrestling in Japan. In the 1970s, there was this guy named Antonio Inoki. He founded New Japan Pro Wrestling, and wrestling over in Japan was so much different from wrestling in the United States. The United States was more about gimmicks. Not to say that the Japanese wrestlers did not have gimmicks, they did not have certain things that made them special, but over in Japan, it was more about almost using more realistic looking full contact strikes, a lot of kicks. If you watch it now, and you kind of watch it in comparison to 90s MMA, it's kind of like, okay, these are very similar, very inspired. And it was inspired by Antonio Inoki. Antonio Inoki, even in 1976, he had I guess the first real major MMA fight, kind of. I mean, like, there was obviously been MMA fights going back hundreds of years, but this one was in a stadium. It was a huge deal. He was a famous wrestler from Japan fighting against Muhammad Ali, who at that point was still one of the best boxers on the planet. They couldn't really agree on the rules. The fight sucked. It ended up being a 15-round draw. But it showed that there was a clear audience to see people actually fight, and there was something that could be made from it. Antonio Inoki eventually left New Japan Pro Wrestling. He founded the UWF, which promoted a more realistic type of professional wrestling. It eventually closed and ended up being succeeded by the UWFI, which failed to gain as much attention as New Japan as well. But after the UWFI shut down, there were multiple wrestlers who were like, okay, this kind of shoot style type of wrestling isn't really getting the attention that we want. Like, maybe there's a fan base there, but what would happen if we did actual fights? Like real shoot wrestling, no bullshit, actual fights. And that eventually led to the rise of Pancrase. It led to the founding of Vale Tudo in Japan. But in 1997, it led to the founding of Pride. It was initially made very much for the same reasons that the UFC was made. It was made to showcase partially the Gracies. Their first card was a big one. They had multiple Gracies on it, so on and so forth. But Pride in Japan was so much bigger than the UFC in the States. It's kind of hard to stress that. See, while the UFC was having to deal with being banned and getting hate from politicians are just lobbying to ban this sport, such as John McCain, and this is a genuine issue. Over in Japan, they were filling 60,000 people in a stadium to watch this new thing, mixed martial arts. At Pride 1, Rickson Gracie and Renzo Gracie scored wins. And at Pride 2, Royce Gracie scored a win, and as did Renzo again, he scored another win. On the undercard of that event, however, fans got their first look at the man who would later become the Gracie Killer.
Of Pride's early shows was a former pro wrestler named Kazushi Sakuraba. His combination of personality, strong technical grappling ability, and unorthodox striking made him a star.
pro wrestler by the name of Kazushi Sakuraba earned a submission win over Vernon White that night, just the second win of his mixed martial arts career. Sakuraba was kind of the opposite of Royce Gracie at the start of his career. The Brazilian family always took pride in their art. You look up photos of them, they would always be in top tier shape. They were very proud of what they do, and they wanted to show they were the best. Not only that they were the best, that their family was the best. They were fighting for something more than themselves. Sakuraba was a pro wrestler. He wrestled as an amateur, sure, in high school and college, but he took more to the entertainment aspect of combat and combat sports. He didn't really take to the fighting side originally. Whereas the Gracies were, they prided themselves on being in shape. Sakuraba was out there just ripping cigs at practice, man. I mean, the guy eating whatever he wanted, fighting at whatever weight class he wanted. He didn't really take himself that seriously in that way. Like, he prided himself on his fighting and his ability, but he wasn't nearly as intense as the Gracies in that aspect. Well, somebody like Rickson Gracie was just peeled out of his fucking tree. Sakuraba just kind of looked like a dude. The differences don't just end there either. While Royce Gracie was dominating in the United States, Sakuraba was kind of a middling professional wrestler in Japan. In the mid-90s, he got his biggest claim to fame in the UWFI promotion, which took a backseat to New Japan Pro Wrestling at that time period. And for those unaware, professional wrestling in the 1990s dominated. Not only in the States, but also in Japan. See, while mixed martial arts and boxing were huge, you can look this up. Attitude Era, WWE, that sort of thing, they were pulling huge numbers. New Japan was pulling big numbers at the time as well. But Sakuraba couldn't even get into New Japan. He was in UWFI. They closed their doors. In 1996, Sakuraba finally main evented on their final show. With no job and no real prospects as far as a shot to get into New Japan or another big company like the WWE, he decided to turn his attention to MMA. A former amateur wrestler, he made his debut at a shoot boxing show that year and was submitted by former Royce Gracie victim Kimo Leopoldo in round 1. The following year, he would enter the UC heavyweight tournament that was ongoing in Japan, and thanks to a lot of weird circumstances, Tank Abbott pulling out of the finals and a no contest in his first round fight, Sakuraba won the whole damn thing. Granted, it was a really weird tournament. He didn't really, earn his way to the finals, I guess you could argue. But still, as one of the smallest guys in that tournament, he won the whole thing. He had that accolade under his belt. He joined Pride the following year and quickly became one of the faces of the company. Starting in 1998, Sakuraba went on an incredible run. He went unbeaten in 6 straight fights. He defeated future UC champions such as Carlos Newton and Vitor Belfort. And that winning streak earned him a shot at Royce Gracie in the fall of 1999. By this point in his career, Royce Gracie is 3-0. He'd already defeated Sakuraba's teammate Naoki Sano at Pride 2 the previous year in his most recent fight. And while the Japanese wrestler was the bigger and more experienced man heading into this fight, he wasn't this big favorite to win, not at all. Heading into this fight, the Gracie family hadn't lost a fight in literal decades. Their run of dominance was unmatched, especially at this point in time in mixed martial arts. Nobody had seen anything like the Gracies. They had taken the world by storm, especially in combat sports. But they hadn't fought Kazushi Sakuraba yet either. On the feet, Sakuraba easily outstruck the unbeaten Gracie. And in round 2, they headed down to the mat, and he submitted the Jiu-Jitsu ace with a Kimura lock. With Royce Gracie watching on, the man who would later become the Gracie Killer ended their family's run of dominance. However, Royce didn't tap. And that was something the Gracies took an issue with. See, this was a referee stoppage. Sakuraba had the Kimura locked up. He absolutely would have broken Royce Gracie's arm if they didn't call an end to the fight. But the Gracies were still unhappy. While Japanese media rightly celebrated Sakuraba's triumph, the Brazilians felt robbed. They felt cheated by Pride as a whole. They decided to correct the record. He hadn't fought in 5 years, but that didn't matter. The former 4-time UFC tournament champion entered the 2000 Pride Openweight Grand Prix and was set to be on the same side of the bracket as one Kazushi Sakuraba. They each defeated their first round opponents, setting the stage for a date in the quarterfinals of this tournament. But the Gracies, having been unhappy with the referee stoppage with Hoyler, they decided to demand some special rules for the fight. Those rules included no referee stoppages, no time limits, and the fight itself can only end in the form of a submission or a knockout. Or there were 15-minute rounds with 1 minute of rest in between, but that was it. There needed to be a finish to this fight. There were no judges, referees couldn't get involved. Those were the stakes in the 2000 Pride Openweight Grand Prix quarterfinal. And, a lot of people would have said no, but that just wasn't Kazushi Sakuraba. They just fought anytime, anywhere, any place. And for a mantra that so many people use, Kazushi Sakuraba really embodied that. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the most skilled, he wasn't the most in shape, but damn it, he came to fight. So with that in mind, the concept of fighting without rounds didn't exactly scare him. But that weird, almost archaic rule set the stage for one of the greatest fights in MMA history, taking place in May 2000.
It's a men's fight. That the fight should be decided by the fighters, not by the referee, not by the doctors or anybody else. They are professionals. They are there to fight. But a fight should be with no rounds, no judges, no doctors. Should be a clean fight. That's what a fight is. Why they wouldn't accept this proposal? Because of me? I'm much smaller than them. Look at this. 78 kilograms. Be man enough to do it. Doesn't mean that he's my friend. I'm going to treat him as an enemy as when he steps on the other side of the ring. But it will be springtime.
Okay.
Or May 1st they will meet the maker.
Okay, guys, this is it. The fight of the century, except to some degree.
This is the fight of the century. It really is. Huge rift between the Gracie family and Mr. Sakuraba and the Pride organization after that. Here we go. Royce comes right after him. Sakuraba goes for the single, and down they...
Admittedly, the fight itself wasn't exactly a barn burner. It had a lot of rest spots. The fact that they, it was a long fight. Let's just put it like that. It had a lot of rest spots. It had moments where the two weren't really doing a whole lot, but it also had some incredible exchanges on the feet and on the mat. It was clear that neither man felt like they could afford a loss in this situation. So they fought, and they fought, and they fought, and they fought. For 90 minutes, these two legends fought. After 6 15-minute rounds, Royce Gracie quit on his stool. In the process, Sakuraba handed the Gracie family another loss. But not only that, he had handed Royce Gracie his first career loss. For decades, nobody could beat the Gracies, and now Sakuraba had defeated not only one, but two of them. In classic Sakuraba fashion, this story doesn't really end well. He decided to fight in the semifinals of the tournament later that night. Yeah, that's right. After fighting 90 minutes, Sakuraba then decided to fight again later in the night. He ended up suffering a second-round loss to Igor Vovchanchyn, but it didn't really, I don't want to say it didn't matter, but he had done something incredible. He had managed to hand yet another family a loss and defeated, at that point, the MMA GOAT in Royce Gracie. Royce was undefeated, multiple-time UFC champion, and Sakuraba beat him. In the process, though, he set the stage for a fight with another Gracie. See, while he had defeated two members of the family, there was an entire clan of Brazilians who were now lining up to try and take off the wrestler's head. For a decade beyond that fight with Gracie, the Gracie clan sent one after the other to try and beat Kazushi Sakuraba. But that's where our story comes to an end for today. I don't normally do commentary style videos, but if you like this one, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm planning on doing a part 2 to this video relatively soon. If you enjoyed, feel free to follow me on Twitter, at Josh Sakuraba, at Courtside Sound for all things relating to the show. New podcast coming every single Thursday with my boy Angel. If you want to go and follow him at Angel Ortega _01. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. This is very much out of my comfort zone, out of my normal lane of content that I do, but I'm a big history guy, and I think that this is the best rivalry, arguably in MMA history. I think it doesn't get told enough, and I also am aware of the fact that because this is a decades-long rivalry, there's no way I could split this up into just one part. I'm going to have to split it up into multiple. So, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Part 2 of this series coming soon. But that's all for me. Peace.